see, I started the looming process. I've got a good majority of this done. Now let's get into specifics on what actually was done. So I loomed it all starting at the ECU. Things all nicely loomed and tied, heat shrinked. And as I go up the harness, this is my first breakout point. This comes where the Made by Fisher strip is, because it's going to be routed under the seat. So this is going to go to the back to for my alky. As I come up the harness, I have another breakout point where this wire here is going to be for the 12 volts that I'm using for my boost solenoid. This wire here is going to be towards keyed ignition. This is my inputs and outputs that I'm going to put a connector on and leave that under the dashboard. And this was this fused relay thing that came with the harness initially. So what I'm using this for is just for the relay that I already have underneath my dashboard that's going to turn on my fuel pump. So these are all going to be breaking out underneath the dash to those spots. Moving up the harness, here I already have the grommet that's going to go underneath the firewall. And as we go the other side, we're going to have my increase and decrease solenoid and that same positive 12 volts that I showed you earlier in the harness that I will be using to power the increase and decrease solenoid. And up top is going to be the positive and negative that's going to go directly to the battery. So coming back here, I've left them so I can break them out whichever way I want, so I don't have any wires binding up under the dashboard. So this wire is going to take a detour and it's going to go to the bulkhead connector, which is this one here. This bulkhead connector is going to be right here. Just got to move back the heat shrink. And as you can see, these are the wires that's going to be on the engine side. Pretty much simplifies everything that I'm doing. And as you can see, I read it all out. So I'm going to have 10 sensors here. TPS, manifold air temp, coolant, map sensor, NOx sensor, fuel pressure, oil pressure, IAC, cam and crank sensor. And these are the ones here that are going to be shared. So the 5-volt reference will be shared 4 times for these sensors here: oil pressure, fuel pressure, map sensor, and TPS. The grounds are all A18 that will be shared, 6 of them in total. So I will be using that on this. So as soon as I get the ground coming out through here, I'm going to run a splitter. I'm going to have it sonic welded, where I'm going to have 6 leads coming off of one that I'm going to run into the other sensors, and I already have the lengths of them, so I can put the ends on them. But first thing I'm going to do is put the bulkhead connector on and move from there. Stay tuned. And just like that, the bulkhead connector is now installed. Heat shrink is on one side, loomed up. Good to go. So now all I have to do is just the engine side of this, which is the easiest part. Yeah, bulkhead connector's all done now. Ain't that nice? Very good, very good. Okay, now that the bulkhead connector is fully pinned, got both sides done. I do this process of elimination one wire at a time. Now that all the wires are done, I'm now going to pull out my meter and I'm going to check each wire from one side to the next side and do a continuity test. And if I hear this thing beep, like that, will make me know that I pinned the right pin to the right socket for each wire. Because, for example, this being the side that's on the engine side, this is for the IAC. This one's B2. So I would check B2 at the ECU. And if I make it from this side to that side and I hear that beep, I know that I pinned that thing right. On top of pinning each wire, I know that typically harnesses are just crimped, but because I do have the luxury of having time on my side, not only did I just crimp these wires, I've crimped and soldered each one so the connection is very strong. I won't get any loose wires breaking off by the pin. On both sides they're soldered. I didn't do anything at the ECU side. That's the way it came from Holley with the flying lead harness. So slowly but surely this thing is coming together. Now what I have to do is start working on the engine side of it and making proper lengths. Looming, heat shrinking, soldering, pinning, etc. But it's coming right along. Okay, now on a more technical side of it, I showed you this paper that I had before where I was labeling the things that are shared on this harness. So as you can see, A26 being the 5-volt reference is going to be used 4 times on the TPS, the map, fuel pressure, and oil pressure. The sensor ground, which is A18, that's going to be used 6 times on these sensors. So because on my bulkhead connector I could see that I have at least right off the rip another 5 empty cavities in here, I'm going to add some redundancy to both of the grounds and the 5-volt reference. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tee into the 5-volt reference and send another one in through the bulkhead and connect it back on this side, just in case anything ever breaks or I have a problem that I'm not just relying on one. I have multiple wires that can do the exact same thing. I'm going to do that for the ground as well. So I have options to eliminate stuff if ever I have a problem. Going to also do that again with the B14. That's for the smart coils. That I'm going to be using that. It's going to be shared 6 times as well. Where's this one? D. Smart coils are shared with one wire that goes back to the battery. So that one I'm just going to do that inside the engine compartment. I'm not going to actually bring that one through the bulkhead harness. That's pretty much it. But yeah, I'm going to add some redundancy to this bulkhead connector and put multiple grounds in through here and tie them back in here just in case I ever have a problem with one of the pins in here, that it's not going to completely shut me down. Let's get it. Okay, now that my continuity test passed, I did every last wire from one end to the other. I did get the beep, so all wires are correctly pinned in my bulkhead connector. Now it's time to move on. And moving on, I went and got some lumen, some heat shrink yesterday at Racetronics, and also got my sensor connectors. I was thinking about getting a labeling machine so I could label each wire, but found another better option over at Racetronics. We laser engraved all the connectors. So for my coolant, it's laser engraved, CTS, my TPS. And this is the reason that I wanted to do that, because 3 of my sensors have the exact same connector, and they're going to be within a couple inches of each other at the back of the intake. So I don't want to mess these ones up and plug them into the wrong one, fuel, map, and oil. Look at that, that's so cool. My IAC, that's labeled, and the air intake temperature sensor. Very cool. So now I can proceed with cutting the correct lengths on the engine side and finishing up this side of the harness. Slowly but surely, we're getting there. Another revision that I'm going to be doing to my harness. Initially, I was going to incorporate this in my harness. I've changed that up. I'm no longer going to incorporate this in the harness. I'm going to leave this as part of the harness that's going to be left inside the car. So I'm keeping this relayed fused module outside of the Holley harness, and I'm going to now use this thing as a hot wire harness for my smart coils and my injectors. When I was looking at the way that I had done the XFI through the bulkhead connector, this is for the injectors. So I'm going to make my Holley harness the same way, where I'm just going to pin it like this on the injector side, and then I'm going to use the hot wire kit that I have existing in the car right now for my injectors, and I'm going to tee it into this. So it'll be a plug and play with what I already have inside the car. So that's what I'm going to be doing with the injectors, and I'm also going to do the exact same thing with the smart coils. So this fuse holder relay is always going to remain inside the car, separate from the Holley harness. I'm just going to have it running along the side and triggering into my wiring inside the car, and have it run that way instead to keep everything cleaner, simpler, and easier to service. Okay, so now that we're nearing the stretch, this is what the harness looks like in its current state. Bulkhead connector has been done. And that is the engine side. So to elaborate a little bit more on what I did on the part that stays inside the car, see how I've taped these things off and bunched them in their sets. So this would be for the smart coils. This is for all the individual leads for the sensors, cam and crank. This is the IAC, and this being the injector. So I've continued that into this and taped them off that way so they all stay in a complete set. So now I've been able to make these a lot less bulky, and they're very flexible. So I have no problems routing this thing. I followed it the full way to the ECU. These breakout points will be loomed with that loom, but I'm not going to do that until I get it inside the car and I complete the destination. I will be putting a connector on my inputs and outputs that I have as auxiliary. So that pretty much is it. Now what has to happen, pulling back out my old XFI bulkhead harness, that's pretty much what this side of it's going to be. If I move this out of the way and put that in its place, that covers the engine side. So yeah, pretty neat. Grommets on for the firewall. All properly done, loomed, heat shrinked, right to the ECU, which will be sitting under the seat. Nice and clean.